This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
We're grateful to have you here with us on this episode of the show. Coming up in just a quick second, journalist Lisa MacGregor, who's put out a piece independently, longer form on YouTube, taking a look at the mountain community of Jasper 1 year after that fire. You're going to go, hang on a second, Real Talk just did a comprehensive episode. You guys just, for an hour and a half, talked to 7 or 8 different stakeholders from Jasper relating to Jasper 1 year after the fire. But Lisa hit the highway, grabbed her equipment, and went out and talked to everyday folks. She talked to business owners. She talked to residents. She talked to renters. She talked to people whose devastation did not stop when the fire did. She talked to people whose reality 1 year after fire tore through one of Canada's tourism crown jewels. 1 year later, there's not a whole lot different from a few days after the fact. They're still without so much. They're still up in the air, uncertain of what their future will look like, housing, employment, and otherwise. And Lisa also digs into a complicated relationship between the different levels of government. We see a lot of finger pointing, most particularly in light of that report that was released, the report commissioned by the town of Jasper, not authored by the town of Jasper. You know, the one that prompted Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith to demand an apology from the town. This, in the days leading up to that anniversary, it gleaned its fair share of headlines, but it may have done a disservice to the people of Jasper themselves, who probably would have benefited a year later from having the attention of the nation on some of the issues that persist, as opposed to some of the political posturing that's happening. We'll dig into that. On the back nine of this episode, Sabine Benoit is going to join us. About a year ago, she wrote a piece for the National Post that implored Canadians to stop blaming immigrants for the housing crisis. We reached out to Sabine about a month ago. We said, it'd be great a year later to follow up on this, to see if anything has improved when it comes to that housing crunch. Not just talking about affordability, we're talking about inventory as well. Under a new government, with a year under Mark Carney's belt, at least from having this on his radar through that leadership race, some of the promises that were made, winning that leadership, the federal election, and the like. Has opposition pressure changed anything? Has public opinion changed anything? Do we truly understand what it is that's causing that housing crisis? And speaking of immigration, this new government under the Prime Minister pledged to and immediately started to cut back on the number of new Canadians that were getting access to Canada, those that were given the opportunity to start a new life here. Sabine herself, a longtime immigration policy advisor, is going to give us this government's report card, at least this far into the tenure. But we kick things off this episode with an exclusive in studio, a longtime journalist, and of course, someone who was in Jasper very soon after disaster struck, and that is journalist Lisa MacGregor. Thanks for making time for us, and welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, you take us back to a year and a week or so ago. You get an assignment, I suppose. You're called, you see what's happening, you're looking around, and you realize what everybody else in the country was realizing at that time, and that was that Jasper National Park was in serious trouble.
And at the time, I think it came so quick that no one really thought it was going to be that bad. I remember I went out on Sunday night, and that's when the evacuation happened. And really, most people thought, okay, we're going to be there for a day or so. The intention was to come back after one night. And even, later on that day, after being, just outside Jasper National Park, most thought, okay, we're going to head home after this. And then within a couple of hours, everything changed. At one point we were going to be brought in and getting a tour of the town and seeing, where things are at with the firefight. And then as we're making our way out there, which is actually right here in this moment, then all of a sudden the crews stopped us and said, no, you have to head back now. And that was about still 12 minutes out from the town. And then we had to go back, and that's when everything turned. And then you'd see, around 6 o'clock, it just became dark. And I've never seen anything like it. Ash was falling from the sky. And then, that's when people were realizing this thing's going to hit the town.
Okay, so a lot of people are going to be listening to this on the podcast. I would suggest that this is an episode of the show that you probably want to watch on YouTube. We're seeing, and we're going to see a ton of exclusive footage. This is either what you were capturing, stuff that you were seeing, or video and photos that were shared with you subsequently. The name of your project, people can find it on YouTube, Crown Jewel in Ashes, Jasper, 1 year after the fire. Obviously, the fire is put out, a couple of days later. It continues to smolder. Crews are using bulldozers and what have you to sort of try to hit those hot spots right away. You realize, of course, that this is a story that's going to impact thousands and thousands of people, in many cases, for the rest of their lives.
Absolutely. And I think at the time there was so much being talked about and so much going on that and especially in the year that followed, you kind of realize how much wasn't being talked about. There's the forest management. How did we get here? How was the fire handled? So much up in the air to discuss, but then a lot of the times it wasn't getting deep into the real issues at hand. Even when you see with the anniversary happening, there's lots of press conferences and you're going over all the different things, and there's healing circles, there's all these things, but I think something that really bothered me, and that, about a month or so ago, that made me compelled to do this project in long form, was that the real issues were not being addressed in any way in the real conversations. And it was tough because you talk to a lot of people and they didn't even want to really go on camera and talk about it. Some of it's controversial. Some of them, you're in this tiny town where everyone, and you don't want to bring up stuff that might make you the enemy or the villain in the situation. So I kind of at one point just drove me bananas that it was all just about optics as opposed to accountability.
We're talking to Lisa MacGregor in our feature interview here presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. You talk about those real issues, the real issues that weren't being discussed. I mean, this is oftentimes the case when natural disaster or some other big issue hits a community, and you get those sort of armchair quarterbacks, people that sit there and go, well, we think that this should be handled differently, or I've heard that this is not being handled properly, and this was no different. There were at that time reports, and there persist reports that there were fire trucks that were turned away, that not everybody had the proper hose connections to be able to hit the hydrants, those sorts of things. When did you start getting people, residents, stakeholders reaching out to you and telling you these sorts of things?
I mean, for the last year, and just a couple weeks after the fire, I would still be talking to people that I spoke with and met when the fire hit the town. And then, in the months that followed, I'd always, speak with firefighters because I was curious. I'd ask them, what exactly happened here? And many, they've heard rumors. Many would say, this is what happened. And there's so many conflicting things. But, and I don't know if we'll ever really know if there was a person that just made a bad decision, or if it was just too many cooks in the kitchen in terms of decision making, or what exactly led to late resources showing up. Or maybe it's just there is a slow system. I don't know if we'll ever know, or maybe it'll be a couple years when I think the trauma has subsided a little bit. But I would say in the past 2 months or 3 months is when I really started to realize that we're not talking about the big issues. And I mean, it goes from the firefight and how it was managed. It also goes into the delays in the rebuild. So there's so many layers to it. And the only way to really get at it is having those tough conversations in long form, and just like putting it all out there, because that's the only time you're going to force change. So I would say, yeah, a couple months ago, a couple weeks is when it really got into it. And it took some time to really get people that would go on camera or even go on record. And then all of a sudden, even the footage, like I covered it in real time, and I've never, like the footage I started seeing and getting from people that were on the ground that would provide it. I mean, that in itself was eye-opening. It still blows me away every time I see an image or an angle that I haven't seen before. You have in your project, and people can check it out, some aerial shots of the Jasper Park Lodge golf course. People talk about this, this sort of almost perimeter of about 30 kilometers around the town. In particular, if you're heading on Highway 93 toward Banff, and what you'll see there. You've referenced long form a couple of times, and I think I might have even said it in my introduction as well. For the average person that might not totally pay attention to how media has evolved and how stories are told every day, not just big ones like this, but every day, why is long form so important or so significant? So there's many factors. So this is what I would call a mini doc. It's about just under 18 minutes long.
Very watchable.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think I've taken what I've learned in television and short form and incorporated that because you just get right to the point. It's quick. I think in this day and age you kind of need that. But there's long form that's an hour long that can be even more powerful. But in this case, the reason it's different than maybe the average packages, if you will, that we do in television and day-to-day media is, you do an interview, let's say you interview 5 people or 2 people, whatever, there's only so much you can include. So a lot of times an interview clip would maybe include 3 clips from an interviewee, maybe if you're lucky, like 5. And a lot of times it's between 5 and 12 seconds. Mm-hmm. And even if it's a great clip, you just don't have the time to make it longer form. Usually a story might be 2 minutes long at most, or 3 minutes maybe. So in this case, you're getting to touch on a lot of issues and letting someone talk like we are right now. I mean, you can have much more of a conversation here with us and just keep going on a topic, as opposed to maybe the short form where it's just very quick, clips get cut. I think sometimes people nowadays, they don't like that and feel as comfortable to maybe open up because they know it might be clickbait or it might be snipped, or there's only so much you can include, which is the way it is. It doesn't mean it's bad. It's just that's the way it is when you have, television and quick media. But with this, I was able to kind of dive into long different topics, from the fire management to fire smart to the rebuild or the lack thereof, and so many factors, and even just letting people's emotions set in and letting them breathe a little bit, so you can really have an in-depth conversation on these important topics.
Johnny, I want to get to that Gord Trenholm quit, the Jasper resident clip, in just a quick second, but I will say I think it's remarkable. Some of these interviews you lined up, a couple of them, including the fellow we're about to hear from, just an average guy, probably not super well known across the country, but his story, it's like he's speaking on behalf of a ton of people. But you've also got, Jasper's former fire chief, and take him speaking to you as well. How would you describe or characterize folks' willingness or even eagerness to participate? I imagine some wanted to talk to you off the record, not looking to rock the boat.
Right. It was really interesting. So with Gord, he, I think, has reached a breaking point. Imagine, his house burned. He was, as a retiree, he thought, this is where I'm going to kick back and enjoy the rest of my life. His home's burned. He had to buy an RV. He basically went across Canada for the last 6 months to figure out what his life's going to look like and kill some time. And then now he's in Whistler's campground with 30 other people that are from Jasper that got burned out. A lot of them are retirees too, because they didn't qualify for that temporary housing. So they're all sitting in this RV, and he's done soil testing after soil testing. And then all of a sudden insurance might hold him up. They don't want to pay for it. And he's, imagine how insane you would go when nothing's happening and you're doing everything right. And he did everything right. He has been in Jasper such a long time, and he loves the place. And now it's almost like he is, you're almost a victim in so many other ways. And I think he was ready to really have a conversation because he felt that it was not being covered and talked about. The reality, I mean, like he said, it's not all rosy here. And I think people, I especially get sick of hearing just the lip service and the optics of things being good when that is not the reality. And I mean, I've talked with home builders, and I've talked with a lot of people there where there's literally no foundations laid. The only 2 foundations laid is one for a mobile home, and the other was for one that was a new home build anyway. So there wasn't, I think, the hoops to jump through in terms of soil testing because it was already kind of gone. So the fact that it's been a year and not a single foundation's been laid, and he's sitting there watching this happen while they talk about, a rebuild being streamlined, when that just is not the case. My
goal is that every single person that listens to or watches this episode is going to immediately go and watch your documentary, so they will hear from Gord. But here's a quick bit of what Gord had to say to Lisa.
Well, it's just frustrating not having things not moving. So like when things come to a halt, that's when you try so hard to get your home started.
What would you say to the governments about this delay?
Well, if somebody wants to step in and help, that would be great, rather than just talk about it. I just want to see it started, really. That would be a big win, seeing a foundation put in. In order to do all this, we need places for those contractors to live as well.
So he touches on something there as well, but I thought what was really significant there, he says, instead of just talking about it.
And that's the thing. I mean, you are going through so many different levels of government, obviously, and I understand that's a challenge, but then you're dealing with insurance, and then you're going back. I mean, the fact that he's been waiting, even after the demolition, and you need all these permits approved, you need the demo file to be closed to be able to rebuild. And I think everyone's fed up with just the lip service and just not actually doing something and making something happen. And I think, it's discouraging. I can't even imagine at that age to just have nothing progressing. And then also, what's crazy about the soil testing is I don't even think that Parks Canada has, the official data prior to when these homes were built. So do you want the soil to be pure? And yet, was it ever really pure before these homes were even built on that land? So that's what's wild to me.
There's we'll be here, by the way, and I want to talk to you about who's on the hook here and really who should be feeling maybe a little bit more heat here, no pun intended, obviously, on this. I mean, people will look to the municipality, people will look to the provincial government, people will look to the federal government, people will look to Parks Canada, right? There's a lot of stakeholders here. Hence, I think some of this tension. But the soil testing is something that we're hearing about recurring. We received, this was probably about a month ago, I read an email from a real talker, Karen. She talked about losing her house there in Jasper. She says it was a rental property. She says, long story. She says, but Parks Canada, Ottawa, she says, is making things impossible. She says, not just for me, but with all of their stringent testing. And she says, somebody has to push back. She says they're not listening. She says, the air quality tests, for example, the things that they're finding in houses here in soil, she says it makes us feel like nobody's going to get into the ground, let alone before this September, because of Parks Canada. What were people telling you? Is there kind of recurring themes like this as you're making your way around the town and conducting all these interviews?
Absolutely. Every single person I talk to in terms of residents, it's the same problem, multiple or repeat soil testing. And a lot of times then you'd go to insurance and say, well, you're going to pay for this because it's not cheap. I mean, you're looking at anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000, maybe higher $1,000 for the soil testing. I know with Gord, he said he eventually paid out of pocket for the second round because he got tired of waiting. And everyone I've talked to has said they have to keep doing it over and over. And there's different things they're finding in the soil. Who knows if that was there beforehand. And so the problem is too, back in September, they did pass a bill, Bill C-76, where that would transfer land development from Parks Canada to the municipality, but that actually hasn't happened yet. And from what I've gathered, they're not doing it yet until that's for future reference if this ever happens again. But now it's kind of, well, the municipality can't handle all this now on their own, so Parks Canada is still doing that, and that's why they're kind of managing the soil testing and all that development of it. But then you got insurance companies that don't want to pay for it, so that's holding it up as well. So it's a mix of a lot of things, and I think at the end of the day, you have to realize that, yes, this has never happened to this degree before, but someone needs to step in and say, let's just actually streamline this process and change things so that we get things going. Because, again, winter is coming, and now this construction season is going to be over.
You do an interview in the documentary with one of Danielle Smith's cabinet ministers, senior cabinet minister Jason Nixon. He puts pressure on other levels of government, other agencies. We'll hear from him in a bit. But I want to circle back to this report that was released, gleaned headlines across the country, probably would have flown under the radar had it not raised the ire of Alberta's premier.
Right.
Who very shortly, I have to assume, after seeing that report, because it wasn't long after it was out, demanded an apology from the town. That, of course, got people all fired up in both directions. I think people that are critical of the premier felt like it was an inappropriate time or an inappropriate sentiment right around the anniversary. Supporters of the premier or supporters of the position that her government has taken through this fire have demanded that she receive exactly what she asked for, which is an apology. What do you make of the timing of the report coming out and the impact that it had?
It's interesting with the timing because I hate to say it, but it did overshadow the anniversary and maybe like the important conversations that I include in my doc that, it's about the rebuild, it's about the issues, maybe even about the management, sure. But I think that's what took headlines. I mean, that's what was the main story. And even though it's an important conversation, the timing I think is unfortunate because it really took away from maybe what this should be about. And that's the rebuild and how things are going and the residents and a lot of different factors. I see both sides because, I mean, these reports are interesting because you're getting a consultancy agency doing this report. also, I always wonder with surveys, like who are they talking to? Because it sounded like they talked to firefighters, residents, a lot of people, but then you hear a totally different perspective from other people that I've talked to. So at the end of the day, they weren't in charge. It's a Parks Canada federal fire. So what more can you kind of blame on them? And if they were calling or were coming through, I mean, I think the whole management of that should have been different overall. So I just think, regardless of who's at fault here, I just think maybe it would have been best if it was saved for after the anniversary, and because it did take center stage.
There's a comment here in our live chat, powered by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider. Dubious says there's only so much you can say about Jasper. One of the reasons why, when I saw your documentary, someone sent it to me, by the way, I think it was like hours after it was out, and I went, you got to come on the show. We got to talk about this, even though we just did a big special episode, even though a lot of people have been focusing on this already, is that I don't see a lot of these stories being told, and there's a lot of high-level stuff. You know, like real talk, the way that it goes. We want to get the mayor. We want to get the federal minister. We want to get right. But then there's like a lot of people that maybe don't have the ability to, like, you know, call a journalist or call a filmmaker and have their story told. I thought it was remarkable, some of the numbers that you shared from firefighters that you had been talking to. Let's point out, this is not, we're not just talking about the firefight, right? We're not just talking about the evacuation. We're not just talking about where everybody went in the immediate aftermath. We're not just talking about the rebuild. We're not just, right? You get the idea. There's like a million things at play here. The numbers that you shared of how many firefighters were there right out of the gates and how that would stack up to the average municipal structure fire shocked me.
It's crazy too, because it took so long to even get those numbers. I mean, I had to push so hard because everyone's afraid to say this is actually what happened. And I understand people maybe are, you know, we've talked about Jasper a lot, and, you know, with the anniversary, and I understand people might get tired of it. You're tired of seeing the images. It's trauma inducing. But that is the whole point of why I did this doc. I was just so compelled to do it because you're seeing all this, but like, the real stories are not being talked about. And I understand that you get tired of hearing the same old thing and the issues and stuff, but you actually have not heard the real issues in the same old story. This past year, I've not heard from anyone the exact number of firefighters that were on the ground until I discovered them. I mean, maybe someone else has those stats, but I haven't seen it. And that was mind-blowing to really put that in perspective. And just for people that don't know, there were under 40 firefighters on the ground and 9 fire trucks until 10 p.m. So obviously that's the fire had already broached the town. So in town, if you go to a fire, let's say there's a house fire, there's at least 3 trucks and 12 firefighters. Typically for one structure. So you can imagine, and half the time you got these wildland people in there, the gear, not the proper gear. So I just think, you know, there's so many stories that are told over and over again, but I do think in this case it needed to be told properly and actually have the real conversations so that people are aware of just how bad it was and how bad it is still.
What would you say to people that are, you know, have you had any detractors here? Have you had people critical of the project? Have you had people accusing you of trying to start something, or, you know, you get the idea?
Nothing so far yet. I mean, I released it last Wednesday evening. I would say the only, surprisingly, it's been a great feedback. I think a lot of people have said, wow, it's great to see this. We haven't seen this type of a project yet, or these kind of conversations happening and this kind of information, let alone the video. I did see one comment just saying, you know, this is trauma video and personal videos to be sharing with people. Yeah. But that is the whole point. So in my defense to that is, you know what, it's hard to see that, but guess what? This is the reality of what happened. No one's seen these videos. These are from on-the-ground firefighters or other people that saw their houses burn. You need to see this stuff so you actually realize how bad it was. What, is it better waiting 10 years before we actually look at it and change the issue? I think it's hard to see these images, like many situations, whether it's war or crime in town, but this is the reality, so don't turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, we're talking to journalist Lisa MacGregor in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. Her new documentary out on YouTube, Crown Jewel in Ashes, Jasper, 1 year after the fire. As mentioned, you did speak to UCP Cabinet Minister Jason Nixon. I'm a little surprised, by the way, and interesting to hear you point out Parks Canada declined a request for your interview. You'd think they'd be eager to speak on something
I went
like
back
this.
And forth with them. So this brings up another interesting topic. So I went back and forth with them, and I said, And they kept saying, go to the press conference on Monday that they were holding. I said, that's not what journalism is about. We need to have an actual back-to-back interview. They asked for questions, which you typically would never do when you're interviewing someone.
Like they want to see the questions ahead of time.
Yeah, exactly. Or they say, hey, well, we can't do an interview, but why don't you just email me the questions or all these things? And I think this paints a bigger picture of why there's an issue, I think, now in journalism and in media, is that there shouldn't be just press conferences because, A, you never get down to the real issue. People are prepped for weeks to, for this case, they had one on the last Monday where they're prepped for weeks to address the situation. There's so much that's covered that so much gets missed. And on top of that, we live in an era where, in my opinion, it's like journalism is death by 1,000 email statements, where statements are the new normal. And to me, that's unacceptable that someone can craft a statement and you by the way, usually don't get them till about the end of the day, which makes it useless. And then you're supposed to just pull something from it. There's zero accountability in that. But now we're in an era where that's accepted. There's no back and forth. There's no way to do a question and follow up. And that's a major problem, but that's exactly what keeps happening, especially with the federal government, a lot of forms of government where they say they don't have the time, but I think that's not the case. They have heavier comms departments than we've ever had in all levels, whether it's City of Edmonton, federal, provincial, and yet they have 10 people that are crafting an email that they send at the end of the day that you can't use anyways. And that's just, again, not journalism, because they're just worried more about optics, which I get because things are put online now and they're snipped and it's harder. But there's zero accountability with these statements.
Everything's changing, and when it comes to the art of storytelling, when it comes to the fourth estate, when it comes to the future of journalism, I'm really grateful that you took something like this on, put your own time into it, used your own gear, went out there, did the heavy lifting, told the stories. And as mentioned, that did include an interview with Cabinet Minister Jason Nixon. And here's a portion. I'm just as guilty as what we're talking about. Look at me. I'm picking from your piece and playing 20 seconds at a time. But I'm doing it in a way that hopefully will drive more attention to your documentary. Here's a portion of what Minister Nixon had to say.
The reality is that there's no homes being built in a significant way in Jasper, and certainly nothing that has been completed a year later. So if the federal government did expedite the process, that's great. They need to expedite it more. We are missing another construction season to be able to help the people of Jasper get their homes rebuilt. That's very troubling. Winter's going to come very quick. This is a mountain community, of course, that is impacted by winter more than other places where you would build. They don't usually build communities or build homes, so I can see why they're having those challenges, and they're continue to not move that red tape out of a way that could see things accelerate to the level they would need to. We've just seen lots of challenges to try to go through the bureaucracy that is created around the National Park Service. And that's the challenge that's got to get out of the way to be able to make sure people got their homes.
I think that folks outside of Jasper would be surprised to hear that not one home yet has been rebuilt.
Big time. And it's shocking because I think everyone's under the impression that it's a streamlined process, and it even took very long to get the facts of the reality of it. And then when people are saying nothing, not even a foundation has been laid, there's no electrical has not been put up back in those areas. And on top of that, people are worried because in order to get these homes built, you need places for contractors to live. And that's still a little bit up in the air. I mean, only so many can fit in trailers in campgrounds. So it is nothing. And I think people are hopeful, hey, hopefully by the fall. That's kind of what I've heard is they're hopeful, but there's no guarantee still at this point.
Yeah. There's the summer, which is so incredibly important to Jasper. Obviously a wonderful time of year to visit. And we encourage people every week we talk about Jasper to get out there and visit, to leave some cash in that community. But that's also the time of year when the tourism operators, the hoteliers, everybody that's involved in hospitality really hopes to boost their revenue because of what can happen in the winter. And it feels like there's maybe even a double or triple concern around the looming winter 2025.
Exactly, because obviously tourism has dropped because of the fire. It's not where it was. There's not even enough accommodation to accommodate more if there were to be more. And winters are grueling in Jasper, so you can't do construction like you can do in a city like Edmonton. There's just not possible with the frigid temperatures. So by the time that rolls around, I'm assuming you have to just pack up and wait. I don't even know if you can do soil testing at that time. Who knows? So imagine having to wait until the spring or the late winter next year to even start your home. can you imagine just being out of your place where you've called home forever for, I mean, they're thinking 5 years is when it's going to be the reality of when people will get their keys and go back into their house, which is absurd.
I don't remember the younger guy's name. There's like a young dad that you talk to. You show them crossing the street, and,
Yes.
and they're on their way to a trailer, almost like temporary housing.
Raj.
Yeah,
Yes.
they look like oil field trailers, but like oil field camps.
Yep.
And he's talking about how grateful they are for that. He said, I think he told you it was the 6th time that they had moved since the fire. And what struck me as I was watching is, he says they're telling us, 2-3 years from now we should be able to get into a place, and he said which would be great. And I'm going, gosh, like this guy's attitude is so positive. In a second we'll talk about just the community and the resilience, and I think that's a great place to wrap this conversation. But at the same time, I couldn't find I couldn't help myself but wondering, a guy like that, I don't know what his occupation is, but I have to assume he has some transferable skills. I have to assume he has some other options where he could take his family. That's got to be a big concern for the community.
Yes, and he works in hospitality. I was blown away by his attitude, and this comes after his apartment burned down, and he had $5,000 worth of stuff stolen after the fact.
Oh, man.
So, but he still said, when I asked him, how are you not upset about this? And he said, that person clearly needed it more than I do. So this guy's obviously just amazing attitude, but, he loves the community so much, and I think that's what's kept him there. But he, works in hospitality, and I think that they've seen so much and seen how other people are still looking for a place to live that he's just happy to be there. And it was kind of funny too, because he said, I lived in an apartment, but now I get more space. So in a weird way, he appreciates that it's a better living situation.
Just like the ability to find some silver lining somewhere. But if you go, actually, we do this feature every Monday called Positive Reflections, and today's is from a real talker that was out in Jasper this weekend, and she writes about kind of the same sort of a thing.
Oh, nice.
The community and the resilience and the people, and that's always been, aside from the natural resources, the mountainscape and the beautiful forest and everything else, of course the Athabasca River, it's always been the people. But how does that strike you as someone who is very familiar with the town for years and years and years, one of the very first, if not the first journalist on site, and now someone who's poured what I have to imagine is probably 100 hours into a documentary, the people? It
was really interesting to meet a lot of the people there. I mean, even when I talked to, for example, Greg, the ex-fire chief, no one that the other people I interviewed didn't know I was talking to him, and once they saw him in there, they said, "Oh, I love Greg. You couldn't have found a better guy to speak to." And everyone knows each other, and how unique is that in this community where most people that have lived there have been there 20, 40 years, and they just love it so much, and they just have such a pride for it. And it's, I laugh because a lot of the people you talk to say, 40 years ago my car broke down, and to me that was a sign I had to stay in Jasper. And just the way that they created their lives there and built families there, and it's such a unique place. So I think I really admire the love for a community. I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. And also too, it's still quite a big place in that everyone knows each other and everyone has a story connected to each other. I mean, the fact that you can, a firefighter that saved your house might be the coach of a kid that's playing on your kid's hockey team there, and everything's intertwined. You got volunteer firefighters. One might be working at the grocery store, and then now they're on their off time saving homes. So it's just such a wild place to live, and such connection with people that, I've even heard that people who are part of the rebuild process that live in Edmonton went out there because for jobs or whatever they're doing, helping the situation, and they have actually moved their families there at this time, which is not a great time to live there, to live there and start a life there because they fell in love with the community, which was mind-blowing to me, that they thought, I went there for a job and now I want to live here because I love everyone so much. Wow.
Marie's in our live chat, powered by Park Power. She says, I don't think anybody has done a story along these lines on the problems that folks went through in High River, referencing, of course, the floods in southern Alberta back in 2013. You were living down in Calgary area in 2013, weren't you? Or had you just moved up here?
No, I think I moved from Edmonton to Calgary then. So it was kind of like just before.
So, but she makes an important point, and you could also, I know that, gosh, how do I say this without stepping in it? I would say Fort McMurray's had its fair share of coverage, not to suggest that there are people that felt overlooked or underserviced in Fort McMurray.
Right.
But you could do something like this, what you've done, this I'll almost call it a labor of love.
For sure.
For Lit in BC, or we talk about the ice storms in Quebec, or you could, you could apply this, the power of a storytelling arm like this in impacting change, I think, in putting reputable, fact-checked information on people's radar so they can have informed opinions about what's going on is incredibly important. At the end of the day, what do you hope to accomplish with this film?
Well, I think that's a really good point about doing it about these communities, but the problem is they're done so much later. So let's say with High River, I mean, someone could do a story, but how many years has it been that it's almost falling on deaf ears? You know, it's too late, too little, too late. So I think with this, I was so compelled to do it now because I'm a big firm believer in sparking change now. I don't want to do 10 years later. And even in terms of fire safety and fire management, we didn't learn enough from Slave Lake or Fort McMurray. So I hope that this is a piece that was done in a timely fashion as opposed to too little, too late, like we've seen with a lot of situations.
Amazing. I was just like, as you're talking to us, this other image comes up and just kind of takes my breath away. This one right here, this is, well, tell us about what we're looking at here for people that are listening on the podcast. Obviously, the Jasper Brewing Company, but this is, you know, as my young son says, POV. Like this is a photo right from the truck, from the fire truck.
And this is actually, so I used every single piece of video and photos that I had throughout the whole thing. I think it was so important to show these images because a lot of them weren't seen before. This is one that was seen before. I think it was one of the early images that came out the night or the night after of the fire, and people were absolutely stunned. I think you can't even believe that that's the main road in Jasper. It doesn't even look real.
It doesn't look real.
No.
It looks photoshopped. You know, there's just this wall. There's like this halo almost of fiery fury that's just looming over this. And I know Jasper Brewing Company, I mean, we could name businesses all day.
Oh, yeah.
We'll continue to do so. I want to shout out like every business in Jasper, but I know that they, you know, they dodged a bullet in some senses, but also they had huge issues as well with their rebuild, like so many others did.
But
even the structures that didn't burn down, smoke damage, water damage.
Yes.
It's not been easy for anybody.
I mean, sometimes that's even worse because it's hard to rebuild around that. But what's interesting about that too is so they have this yellow van that was parked. It's kind of like their work van that was parked in a community. I think it was near some area. Everything was scorched. Homes were burned around it, and it was in mint condition, untouched. Which I saw a man whose Corvette. It was like a 1970s Corvette, and everything around it was parked on the driveway, was torched, like leveled completely, and there was not even a melt of the front bumper. Like it was in mint condition. And those are the crazy images you see where you're like, imagine walking into that, but then it's somewhat of a silver lining where it's saved, if you will. I mean, it's obviously it doesn't compare to a home being gone, but it's so interesting to see that. And that was one of the vans that were untouched.
It's remarkable what you've done with this. And I think that it has, you know, I don't mean this to serve almost as an indictment of our own show, but you've filled a void in the sense that you know, we can, you know, and I've talked about this with this audience all the time. You know, it's sometimes you really want and need the big interviews. You have to have the ministers, you have to have the mayors, you have to have the executive directors and the CEOs and et cetera. But like, it's also incredibly important to be talking to the everyday people, the real people. We always say real talk about real issues that are living the stories day in, day out, whether or not they're leading the headlines, whether or not everybody's paying attention to them.
100%. And I think, you know, you do a great job with this show because you can have these long conversations, and it's not even your fault that you can't go into these communities because of just the way, you know, certain setups are. So that's why, you know, at the end of the day, you can only get these types of interviews and conversations when you are able to go there, even alone. Like, I think when you can talk with someone one-on-one, it disarms them a little bit. It was just me and this, you know, my old school DSLR camera, and having those real conversations and being personal and being genuine. That's the only way you're going to get deep into the matters at hand and the problems. There's only so much you can do, and it's not to a fault of media or to, you know, shows like this. It's just the way it is. But at the same token, why is it like that? Maybe it's a time to change it and look past the typical things you have to get.
We could obviously do another hour on the state of media and the future of media, but I also think with a lot of people talking about how difficult it is, and Jasper would be a good example, but in particular, like smaller communities, smaller towns, or anywhere west of Toronto, to get stories told that aren't, so-called syndicated stories that aren't just being applied or inserted into newscasts from across the country. Instead of lamenting the loss of that and doing nothing about it, like you said, you've picked up your own camera, you've headed out, and what you've created is an incredibly important piece of journalism. So I want to thank you for that as an Albertan, and also just let you know how proud I am of you, and thank you for making the time to talk about it on Real Talk.
Thank you for having me and for having the conversation and noticing that this is something different and that this was an important piece to be told and appreciated. So I really thank you very much.
Absolutely. Lisa MacGregor, longtime journalist, joining us exclusively on Real Talk in our feature interview presented by Mercedes-Benz Edmonton West. You can find it yourself on YouTube. That is Crown Jewel in Ashes, Jasper 1 year after the fire. If you're watching or listening to this after we've streamed it live, you'll find a link directly to Lisa's documentary in the show notes. This conversation made possible with the support of Friesen Brothers in 16 different Alberta communities, including Hinton, right outside Jasper. Boy, has that team at Friesen Brothers ever stepped up in support of that community. Ran into some Real Talkers, as a matter of fact, from Hinton just a couple of days ago, just this weekend, and had a chance to pick their brains about the growth of that community, the expansion of that community, obviously population-wise, due to what we were just talking about. Friesen Brothers has celebrated now 70 birthdays. How about that? 70 years of Friesen Brothers in 2025. Since 1955, they've proudly served this province, our home province, delivering fresh, local, and high-quality products to families across Alberta. And this incredible milestone reflects their dedication to quality and the trust of Albertans over the years. So on behalf of Friesen Brothers, thank you, Real Talkers, for being part of this remarkable journey. Your support has made it all possible through this year, through 2025. Stay tuned. We're going to keep you posted on plenty of different ways that you can celebrate throughout the year. Also, just a quick reminder, August 1st, your next chance to save 15% on all grocery purchases, $75 or more. That's the first day of every month only at Friesen Brothers. This summer, a lot of successful Canadians are going to be taking some time to pause and reflect on their career and retirement goals. At North Road Investment Council, they're working with Canadians who are doing just that. They've built successful careers. Now you want to ensure that your wealth is being organized to deliver a successful retirement. The typical client at North Road has at least $2 million in investable assets, oftentimes coming from detail-driven, analytical professions, dentists, architects, engineers. If that sounds like you, the team at North Road Investment Council is interested and open to a conversation. You can visit their website. That's northroadic.com. And start a conversation with Marshall, Carey, and their team built on clarity, discipline, and true alignment. California Closets of Canada reminding you that they are proudly Canadian-owned and operated. And not just that, but did you know that every installation that goes into a home, an office, a business, designed by the team at California Closets, has been manufactured right here in Alberta, sourcing every single material from as close to home as possible. That's right. That's how this family-owned business rolls. The journey with California Closets, before they transform that dream walk-in closet of yours, or maybe your family's entertainment center, maybe they get your laundry room organized for you with a brilliant and efficient installation. Well, it all starts with a free design consultation. You got nothing to lose. You sit down with a designer, you talk about the space, you talk about your budget, and then they go to work. And you can operate with the confidence the entire time, knowing that everything they install is guaranteed for life. You can request that free consultation today by visiting californiaclosets.ca. And if you didn't catch our Friday episode yet, that's the 25th of July, just a few days ago. When you do, you're going to see what I thought was an absolutely fantastic roundtable as we observed Disability Pride Month. 3 fearless and passionate advocates for inclusion and accessibility, calling it the way it is, which is just how we like our roundtables. That was presented in partnership with Athabasca University. That's athabascau.ca. That's where you can find them. Carrie Anton was a member of that panel. She's doing amazing work with Athabasca University when it comes to accessibility for students. She painted just a remarkable picture. Carrie was born legally blind. By the way, she's a gold medal winning Paralympian, but she talked to us about some of the challenges that people that are experiencing different or challenges that the average person can't wrap their mind around. She says this is like everyday stuff for us. Johnny, when she was talking to us about, she says, try to use your computer without a mouse, right? Try to read a website if you don't have your sight. Like, just obvious things. I thought it was such a wake-up call. And it made us so proud to partner with Athabasca University as she's laying out exactly what they're doing to make online post-secondary learning accessible to everybody. So a shout out to Carrie Anton, a shout out to that Friday, July 25th roundtable, and a shout out to Athabasca University. You can learn more about the AU Advantage by visiting their website today. That's athabascau.ca. See a lot of talk in our live chat this morning, powered by Park Power. And a shout out to everybody that joins us live. That's weekdays at 8:30 Mountain Time, 10:30 Eastern. Talking about the Hockey Canada verdict. That was another story that broke just before the weekend. And we did have Dave Cournoyer, Omar Mualim in to talk about politics, but they took that on as well. And so did the producer of this show, Johnny Infamous. And I thought it was obviously important that we touch on that story as we headed into the weekend. You were out and about. I saw on your Instagram, you're DJing weddings. You're a man around town.
We were out together for Oyster Fest.
Yeah, we sure were.
Boy,
was that ever fun at the JW Marriott, the first annual Oyster Fest.
Beautiful day.
But was that something you think that was on people's radar? We were out and about. We were out at West Edmonton Mall, kids' birthday party this weekend.
Yeah.
Bunch of people talking about that Hockey Canada verdict.
Yeah, I did a wedding on Saturday where, we were talking about people like this the other day. Guys who almost got a cup of coffee. There's a lot of them you meet. Guys who, played minor league, almost made it to the NHL. And I do a lot of weddings where guys are like that now. And they moved on to other things. They coach in Europe and come back and forth and stuff like that. And there was chit chatter around. I could hear people talking about it, and people are split on it. Some people say give these guys another chance in the league. Some people say they're horrible people. I think I lie somewhere in the middle. I think they were young, but I think they were men, and the one thing I do see, though, is a lot more men talking about it than women. The women seem to be standing there quietly because, it's hard to voice your opinion sometimes when, you're in a large group of white, let's be honest, some of these weddings, affluent, men who've been in sports. So I just think, it's kind of crazy. And people in our chat today too, like not guilty doesn't mean innocent. It literally, it just doesn't. You can't find me a link or cite any law book that says it does. OJ was found not guilty. Casey Anthony was found not guilty. George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin,
right.
He was found not guilty. Obviously, there was something wrong with that case. You can't look at that case and go, that person is innocent. Now, not guilty just means prosecution in the States didn't do their job. Here it's the Crown. But, at the end of the day, I'll just say this because I know we got our guests waiting here. I just feel sorry for the victims because so many times, they're like even in this case, for one guy to have to step up and testify on his own behalf out of the 5, whereas, Emily had to go through 5 grueling, high-priced lawyers. It's the system's rigged against the little guy, against the victims, against the people who we should be, protecting.
Yeah, I saw there's a lot sort of in the comment. People always joke, don't read the comments. Don't read the comments. I think it's important to do so. We try to read every comment that anybody leaves on any episode of our show and respond to as many as we can. And this, in a way, is us inviting you to do exactly that, to leave your thoughts on what you're hearing or what you're seeing on the show. You can also send us an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. We're going to make time, through these summer months. It's never sleepy when you're doing news talk because there's always something happening. And every single episode we're going to put together, we believe is going to be well worth your valuable and precious time. But most especially, I think through the summer, we can leave a little more breathing room to really get into some of those audience emails. There are so many people with lived experience that have perspectives that are so much more, in some cases, tragically informed than ours on the stories that we're talking about, whether it's losing everything to fire, whether it's tangling with an insurance company, whether it's the red tape and bureaucracy of whatever. We saw that in the infill debate. We've been talking about that. They're dealing with it in Edmonton. They're dealing with it in Calgary. The housing crunch being experienced across the country. But the perspectives, quite frankly, that are going to resonate most with me are the ones with people that have walked miles in those shoes, walked miles in those boots. And if that's you, we invite you to be in touch with this show. We value your input. We value your feedback. About a year ago, it was at the end of August of 2024, a good friend of this show, Sabine Benoit, wrote a piece for the National Post. Stop blaming immigrants for Canada's housing crisis. We thought this summer it would make sense about a year later to circle back and see if, in Sabine's estimation, anything's changed in the public's awareness, in the reality, in Canada's housing policy, in Canada's immigration policy. Sabine Benoit is the Canadian Policy Associate at the Consumer Choice Centre, where she advocates for Canadian consumers on issues like housing. She was a policy advisor to 2 federal immigration ministers, and it's wonderful to welcome her back to the show. Thank you for making time for us. It's nice to see your face again.
Thank you so much for having me on, and congratulations on 1,000 episodes. What an exciting milestone.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of hard for us to believe it. You know, we're coming up on the show's 5th birthday, and it feels like in ways we're just getting started. But you've been on the show before. I know people are going to recognize you, but let's tee this up. About a year ago, this is on your radar. So much so that you write an op-ed in one of Canada's national papers. Why did you put that in front of Canadians? Why was this story so important at that time?
Well, I was just feeling really frustrated at the time. I still am about the fact that all we've been hearing from politicians is we have to cap immigration, we have to stop immigration. The fact that housing is out of control, we have a housing crisis, is because there's just too many immigrants coming to Canada. And this is something that came out of all the sides of the spectrum of politics in Canada. So you had Pierre Poilievre talking about, we have to balance the number of immigration with the number of homes. A lot more immigrants are making housing more scarce. Danielle Smith was talking about unrestrained open border policy last year, and that's what's affecting things like housing. And you have also Justin Trudeau. He said in 2024, he lowered immigration numbers so that he could deal with this issue of housing. And Mark Miller at the time, you might remember, talked about how necessary it was to do that. And I was starting to get really upset because if you know about the housing crisis and you know about immigration, politicians knew since like 2010. The OECD has mentioned many times in their reports, politicians have known since at least 2010 that a housing crisis was looming, and they didn't do anything about it. There's things that can be done, and they haven't done anything. And the easiest scapegoat is vulnerable people like immigrants who are just coming to the country so they could start a life here. And now it's being downloaded onto people thinking, oh, I can't find a house, I can't buy a house because of immigrants. But really, it's because of really terrible policies or lack of policies that have been implemented by politicians. So I think it's like the reason for housing shortage is coming from inside the house, as much as they like to blame it on others.
You know, one of the challenges that I have as the interviewer and that you have as the expert is we're really talking about 2 huge files at the same time. We're talking about housing, big file, probably more on Canadians' radar now than at any point in, I'm going to say, the last 50 years, maybe more. And then we're also talking about immigration, which is also a huge file because immigration has something. Well, I'm not going to lecture an immigration policy expert on why immigration is so important as subject matter, but number one, on a nation's role internationally and in response to crisis, on gentrification of industries and recruitment efforts, and a nation, or maybe in our case, a provincial jurisdiction, doing its best to manage a real population explosion, trying to staff things from restaurants and and surgical suites and, harvest time in agricultural applications. I mean, there's a million reasons why immigration is so important. You served as a senior policy advisor to two different federal immigration ministers. How typically has policy been formulated? What typically, and I mean, you could probably lecture us for a few hours, but what typically is being considered when a ministry and a government is establishing its immigration policy?
Well, in this case, they're seeing that there isn't enough housing and they have to do something about it. And something that, look, we've done something is let's cap immigration, especially temporary immigration, like students and temporary foreign workers. That would be the first step you take, just so that you can show Canadians, look, we're doing something. We're worried about it too. We want you to be able to get a house, to afford a house. There's not enough supply. Let's just calm things down until the supply grows. And that's an understandable thing to do when housing is we are in a crisis with housing in Canada, but that's just not enough at the end of the day. That's one file, as you said, like that's immigration, but the housing issue is much bigger than that. And concentrating on temporary immigration, especially when you're talking about workers and students, that's like the last line of defense on this, because temporary foreign workers often live where they're working. So a lot of the time they're living, they're in the agricultural sector, and those who are employing them provide them with a place to live. And the international students, which what really upsets me on that one is, first of all, they're young, potential future taxpayers that will probably integrate into Canadian life much more easily. Will start their lives early in Canada, so they're actually kind of ideal immigrants. I would prefer to have them stay. But the other part of this is they pay so much money, so much more than Canadians, to go to the universities that they're going to. That money can be taken by the universities to actually build places for them to live. It's not that hard.
Have you, Sabine, obviously, we can look back on the tenure of Prime Minister Stephen Harper, to look at up until 2015, how Conservatives were managing these files. Obviously, you have about 10 years of Trudeau that you can evaluate, maybe a little bit more difficult to talk about legacy, as he's been out of the job for about 6 months or so. And then you've got a new Prime Minister, same party name, but let me ask you in the form of a question. Is the Carney government demonstrably different on these files than the Trudeau government was, or how would you stack it up against Harper's policies?
Well, I think during the Harper years, we were still, as a country, pretty excited about immigration. There was a lot of talk at the time about how, this government has brought in more immigrants than any government beforehand. There was still a consensus in Canada, I would say, about immigration is a positive. I feel now that that has changed. That I think that when you talk about housing and you talk about these things, and you talk to just everyday Canadians that are concerned about their futures and the futures of their children, they're saying, oh, maybe immigration isn't that great. Maybe we really should stop immigration. I think that's a bit of a legacy of the Trudeau era, unfortunately, where perhaps it wasn't managed the way it was supposed to be. Perhaps definitely the housing was not managed the way it was supposed to be. And then you're looking at stats like RBC, as you see on the screen now. The Royal Bank of Canada is saying that we need this immigration. The only growth in the job market in Canada over the past decade has been immigrants. If we cut that off, that's a problem. And that's what Carney wants to do. He wants to lower those numbers. He's been coming out saying that. And that sounds great politically, and perhaps makes people happy, makes them feel relief. But the economy will not be feeling relief, I'll tell you that, because we are relying on immigrants to sort of boost our economy and prop it up at this point. We have an aging population, and the people that are replacing that aging population are immigrants. Another thing to consider is almost a third of businesses in Canada are owned by immigrants. That's a huge number of people that they are employing. That's a huge portion of the economy that they're propping up as well. That might be a good idea to cap immigration in the short term, but in the long term, that's going to cause us a lot of grief economically. Even refugees, when they come to Canada, they might use some social services, but over their lifetime, studies show that they actually contribute more in taxes than they ever take from the economy through social services. So it's a net benefit to Canada still, no matter what politicians try to tell you, try to keep the heat off of themselves. And we really do need it for our economy. So they have messed it up. We do need perhaps a cap on immigration now because of this. It's a really bad scenario, though, for our economy and for our country in general.
I'm referencing a report here. This was City News released in October of 2024. You're actually quoted in the piece. The headline, "Majority of new Canadians feel they are being unfairly blamed for the housing crisis." You're nodding your head emphatically. Let me let you just take this over.
Well, 40% of immigrants have considered moving since this started occurring. Like they're tired of being blamed for these things. They can't find homes too, by the way. So it's not like they're taking everyone's homes that they can possibly have. They can't find housing either. They're kind of locked in a rental spiral. They can't grow their families, perhaps because they can't find the housing to do that. Just like Canadians who have been here a very long time cannot grow their families in a lot of instances because they don't have the housing to do that. So when you're looking at that many immigrants saying, I'm actually done here. I can't survive with my family. I came here for a better life and it's not panning out. And I think a growing sense of xenophobia might be part of that as well. It is hard to keep hearing that you're the problem for every issue when it comes to housing and other things. So at the end of the day, perhaps people are saying, I'm actually done here, and that's really bad for us as an economy, as a country. There's a lot of cultural positives to having immigration and diversity in Canada. We've seen that over the years. It's pretty undeniable, but the economic impact on us is going to be pretty massive. So that's really unfortunate.
We're talking to Sabine Benoit. By the way, you offered congratulations very graciously out of the gates. I hope it's okay if I publicly congratulate you on your recent nuptials. Recently
you.
married. Absolutely fantastic. Got to be exciting. Previously, Sabine el-chidiac, but people would have heard on the show if they're putting two and two together here, or they're Googling your name to follow up on some of these news reports. Sabine Benoit joining us here on this episode, the July 28th episode of Real Talk. We're talking to you live from the Mercer Warehouse in downtown Edmonton. I know you're not in Edmonton with us, but I also know that you're paying attention to what's happening in Alberta. You're paying attention to what's happening in Calgary. We don't have to necessarily wade into the infill debacles unless you want to. These big 8-unit mid-block suites. We're talking about density. We're talking about neighborhoods evolving. It's becoming very contentious. I think that it's probably playing a huge role, 85-ish days out from our municipal elections and in what some people are determining to be their ballot box question, so to speak. But you've asserted that every level of government has made policies that have made it more difficult for homes to be built. What specific zoning and regulatory barriers do you find or do you evaluate to be most problematic? And what are you seeing in Alberta right now? How do you assess what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, I don't live in Alberta, but I love it. I think it's one of the most beautiful places on earth, by the way, just saying.
We agree.
I love it when my work takes me to Alberta or I end up there somehow because I love it. And I'd like to go on vacation there soon with my husband.
Yeah, well, come visit Jasper.
That would be lovely. Oh, I wish.
Yeah.
So, what should be done on housing regulations? So much can be done, and so little is being done, unfortunately. And I think Alberta is a microcosm, and you talked about, Calgary and Edmonton. It's sort of a microcosm of the pressures that city councilors are under, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But municipally, eliminating exclusionary zoning rules would help so much as possible. That has to happen. Not regulating what can be built on a lot, not regulating density, not saying only single family homes are going to be built. Bans on rental units. These are all things that are just making life much more difficult for people. Now, Toronto got rid of that. And they still require you to jump through hoops if you want to change the zoning from commercial to residential. Now, that's a really great idea, in my opinion, because there's a lot of buildings that you don't even have to build. They're already there. All you want to do as a developer or a building owner is just make sure that you can convert that space that isn't being used. As we all know, after COVID, a lot of people are working from home. I work from home now. And a lot of offices are sitting empty in Alberta and Ontario, all across the country. That's the problem. I mean, there's nothing happening in that building. Why not turn it into a residential area? It's so difficult to do, though, even if you want to do that in Toronto. So they got rid of the exclusionary zoning rules. That's great. But then they still require you to jump through so many hoops if you want to change the zoning from commercial to residential. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to list a few things that they force these developers to do before
Sabine, we got all the time we need for this.
Let me tell you some lines. Archaeological
Johnny has a lunch date at 2:00. We got to be done by 2:00 Mountain Time, so we're good.
I'm sorry, but the zoning is so bad that he might not make it.
Oh yeah. Uh-oh.
Archaeological assessment, service and facility study, environmental impact study, energy strategy, heritage impact statement, natural heritage impact study, planning rationale, public consultation report, transportation impact study. What developer in the right mind would actually go through with all of that? Who is going to do all of this? This costs time, it costs money. It's extremely difficult. So you're just going to give up. And if you really, really want to do it, it's going to take you almost a year to even get through that, to even get to the point of actually perhaps getting approval before you can even go forward with that. This is crazy. It is not okay during a crisis. We're calling it a housing crisis. We're so quick to say, okay, we're going to cap immigration, but we're not that quick to say, municipalities step up and do the work to allow people to actually build, because this is a supply issue at the end of the day. And it can't always be single family homes. I know they're very nice and everybody really likes them, but unfortunately we have to build up if we want people to actually have housing in this country.
Okay, I honestly didn't think that we were going to spend a ton of time on infill, but we are, because I have to follow up. This is just real life. This is a friend of the show who probably didn't think maybe that his Facebook post to his friends was going to be splashed all over Real Talk. But like, here's an example of the flip side of this. Okay, yeah. Chris LaBosse here, well-known Edmonton entrepreneur, posted this on his Facebook just over the weekend. And this is something that he spotted. This is not in front of his house, and this is not something that he personally authored, but he shares a photo of it. Okay, so this is in a relatively affluent area of Edmonton. For reference, this based on the address, Crestwood type area for folks. This is about a 10-12 minute drive west of downtown. Sabine, let me cut to the chase. This is about 5 minutes from Connor McDavid's house. Okay, so that'll give you a sense of the neighborhood. But the rendering here, the drawing from a civilian, not an architect, says what it was. Okay, this is a home that was taken down, knocked down for redevelopment. What it was on one lot, a pie lot, one home, one garage, one family, multi-generational, they say, and 2 collection bins, okay, garbage and recycling. One home, one garage, one family, 2 bins, and lots of trees. And here is what it will be on that same lot. 16 units. They have rentals in bracket over 2 lots. So these are so it's been split. Okay, 16 units, no garage, so no on-site parking. Ostensibly 16 to 32 people. Then 32 bins, right? 1 garbage, 1 recycling for each unit, and no trees. And obviously that sort of a thing is tough for people living in a neighborhood like that, on a street like that, admittedly, who are accustomed to some creature comforts like ample parking, like enough room for everybody's garbage and recycling bins. And people may roll their eyes at this type of stuff, but this is also real life stuff. This is stuff that if you can't find parking anywhere near your home, or if there's nowhere for the garbage trucks to operate, that's actually something that is a real hassle. So what do we say, or what are folks like this supposed to take away from a conversation like this, when the position, which is not inaccurate, that we need more density, that we need to build up, is oftentimes just kind of served up to them as a, well, I guess you're shit out of luck type scenario.
Yeah, I totally get that. And I wouldn't roll my eyes at that at all. I think that's legitimate. The problem here is that there's a third option. There's one option is having the one home. The second option is having all of these homes and not enough infrastructure. The third option is to have more homes and figure out the infrastructure. There are ways to do this. It happens all the time. If you sit down with a developer and tell them, we need this, we need like this amount of trees, we need this and that, we need ability to have the garbage disposal areas and all of these things, it can be done. It's not a win or lose black and white situation at all. So that's something you can say to people, in that, like, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And the flip side of that is, if we don't allow for more housing, perhaps even just less than what you just showed me, just a little bit more. Let's just build. We have to build something. The impacts of nothing being done about housing are pretty significant. I mean, we have a dwindling workforce versus an aging population. We need skilled tradespeople to actually build homes. We need people to come to Canada and be able to do that. It's going to slow down family growth. Like, forget about immigration for a second. How can family growth continue in Canada when people don't have the housing to be able to do that? You can't have 2 or 3 kids in an apartment with one bedroom. You have to move and expand. If there's not room to do that, it makes you rethink starting a family. Canadians' debt load is going to get a lot worse. It's already really bad. If the less housing we have, the more expensive housing is going to be, and people are going to take on so much more debt. And then there is a growing hostility towards immigrants due to the frustration with housing. We can't deny that, and the fire is being fueled by politicians talking about it in this way and using that as the only way out. There is a way for developers to talk with communities, to sit down with communities and figure out ways to keep them happy, but at the same time not completely destroy the lives of everyone else who's just trying to live.
Sabine, let me. I stepped on your toes there. Sorry. Let me loop in our live chat here. These are going to be just random comments coming from people over the course of our first 10 minutes or so. Whitetrium says, make secondary home ownership taxes 100% of property value. Force all those properties to be out on the market. I mean, okay. I'm just reading the comment. Crash housing prices by 30 to 40%, and put 1 million people into home ownership. Anytime you start talking about crashing housing prices, obviously that's a recipe for a short political career for sure. But there's a ton of comments in here along those lines referencing, someone who would have, different generations, typically speaking, a boomer that would have seen their property values or the value of their home, in most cases, their number one investment, triple or quadruple or 5x, versus a young person, a young couple, whatever the case may be, a new Canadian coming to the country with relatively modest resources and trying to enter or buy into a market right now where what we describe as the average price of a single family detached, or the average price of a duplex, or the average price of a condo to be astronomical compared to what it was even 10 or 15 years ago. As mentioned, you've served as a senior policy advisor to federal cabinet ministers. How do you reconcile that? You've got, and I know I'm painting in broad strokes, obviously, and I'm making big generalizations here, but for folks whose nest eggs, their financial security in retirement and in old age on fixed incomes is heavily dependent on the equity that they have in their home. How do you reconcile that and not ignore that element of the population, while at the same time, maybe not crash, but at the same time try to cool the housing market to make it accessible for people? Alberta is a classic example of this. You're trying to draw people here. You're trying to recruit talent here from everywhere else in the world, and especially across Canada. But the minute that housing becomes unaffordable for the average person, there disappears the appeal of moving here, right?
It's true. It is very difficult. And, there is sort of a population boom in Alberta, which I think population booms are great. They're in general a very good thing. You're looking at people coming because they love the province. They think that they have opportunity there. That means that the economy is strong. It's good. That's great. And when you're looking at this particular province, you're seeing a mix of immigration, Canadians moving to Alberta from Ontario and BC for jobs, and people growing their families. So it's not just like a lot of immigrants are coming and that's creating a boom. It's actually pretty multifaceted in Alberta, which I find fascinating. And politically, I'd say Alberta better get ahead of this. The population movement is happening. They see it. They're not allowed to just pretend it's not happening. They're not allowed to put their fingers in their ears and then cover their eyes and say, oh, la, 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 the immigrants. They know it's happening. Don't do what you did in 2010 when you when you knew this was happening and nothing was done municipally, provincially, federally. We know it's happening. Please do something about it.
It's interesting that you've done this several times in the interview. You're including all three levels of government here on the accountability front. I think that there will be audience members that are, and there's nothing wrong with this, but they're oftentimes keen to pin somebody down on the political spectrum, but you're not really celebrating anyone's track record, and you're definitely not giving anybody a pass.
No. Well, no, because we're in a crisis. I mean, we're not in a crisis because one person did something. This is like a pretty mass movement of incompetence to figure out zoning. And I will say, I'm being pretty harsh on politicians, but I will say there is a lot of pressure on them because what you said earlier, people have their nest eggs. People are they don't want things to happen in their backyard. There's the YIMBY and NIMBY split. Not in my backyard. Yes, in my backyard. You've got these people that come to the meetings. They come to the municipal meetings. They talk to their councillor, and those people are usually the ones who don't want more development. So they have a lot of pressure on them to satisfy those people, but also find housing. So it's not easy, but it can be done.
Mm.
It's not easy, but it can be done. Either people don't have housing or they do. There's really no third option there. Like you
Yeah.
either have place for people to live or you don't.
Yeah, I think that in Calgary and Edmonton, October 20th, we'll be voting municipal elections, and I think not in every riding, not in every ward, as we'll call them. I think like in the suburbs, for example, generally speaking, this is probably less on people's radar. This is probably less of a concern in the relatively new suburbs. There's not a lot of new houses being torn down to make way for eightplexes mid-block, but in the older neighborhoods, in the more mature neighborhoods, I think that this issue will probably be the issue for a lot of voters who are deciding whether or not their incumbent counselor, if they're running again, is going to continue to be able to hold that office. Were it not for Donald Trump and the trade relationship and the tensions between Canada and the U.S., do you think that immigration and housing, this kind of blended issue that we're talking about right now, would have been more of an election issue in the most recent federal election?
I think that obviously immigration has become more of a conversation because of Donald Trump and what's happening there. I think everything that happens in the United States sort of reflects in Canada in some way or another, politically or in the conversation, in the zeitgeist of politics in Canada. So I think it did contribute to it. But you don't really have to look to the United States to look around in your own neighborhood and see that there's just not enough housing. And you can just ask a millennial. I'm a millennial. The millennial dream for me is to have a townhouse with a little patch of grass in the back for my dog.
Yeah.
That's all I want. And I'm looking around and I can't find that. It's really, really hard to find it in Ottawa.
Where's home for you? Ottawa's home for you?
Yes, Ottawa. And
is Ottawa
it's
grappling with
difficult.
some of the same stuff that Calgary and Edmonton is? I mean, is it a similar conversation there?
Absolutely it is. But the good news in Ottawa is about two years ago, they actually allowed for people to convert more easily office space to residential area. It's only now that people are actually taking them up on it. And it's not just residential. They're actually using it for temporary housing for homeless people, for newcomers that don't have homes, just sort of a temporary housing situation. They're converting into that. They're also converting it into residential areas. So we have this tech park in Canada. It's a city outside of Ottawa, a little bit outside of Ottawa. There's just buildings for IT purposes, and a lot of them are sitting empty now because people are working from home. They're actually converting 115 rooms there. They're going to make it into 115 units of residential living, which is really nice. So things are happening, but we're still looking at a federal government that's saying maybe the government should be the developer. They're still, since the Trudeau era, they've been saying that the federal government should be the ones to figure out the development. They should be the ones to come up with new government bureaucracies to deal with this. That is not the answer. It has never been the answer. You have to allow developers to develop. They know what's going on the ground. They're talking to people in the neighborhood, in the community, and they know what the community character is, and they know what's needed and what's not needed because they want to sell, right?
Yeah.
They don't want to. It's difficult for me to say the people who have done the wrong should be figuring out the right way to do things.
I kind of agree with you, and I kind of disagree quite strongly, as a matter of fact, on one point you just made.
Please disagree with me.
Yeah, we can't all get along all the time. We can get along. We can disagree. Someone, a real talker by the name of Spencer once wrote in to us and said that we can learn to disagree without being disagreeable. And I thought, well, isn't that a nice way to put it, at least in theory? But I don't necessarily agree that developers know and respect the character of neighborhoods. I actually think that there's a lot of opportunistic developers. And again, I don't use developer as a slur. That's not a dirty word. Many friends that work in this industry, and many of them feel very passionately about accentuating and tapping into a community's fabric and building structures that fit the spirit or the vibe or the history of that community. And then there's others that are perhaps building from outside the city or perhaps coming in from outside the province that have dollar signs in their eyes, that see huge opportunity in Alberta, which a couple developer friends have referred to me as the Wild West of real estate construction in Canada, in Alberta, in particular in Edmonton. You can get away with a lot right now that you can't get away with, for example, in Vancouver. And I think that that's one of the the big reasons why a lot of people are pushing back. I used that example from Chris Labasi. You're talking about these, this monstrosity that's going up in their neighborhood. There's no respect for the character of the neighborhood. It doesn't fit. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb, regardless of the quality of the construction. And that's what I think turns a lot of people off, neighbors and other residents of those communities. Now, we can go tit for tat on this. We can go back and forth on this all we want. But I guess, it all boils down to this, and that is, what is the right way to incentivize and attract developers? You and I are definitely on the same page that I do not think, generally speaking, that the government should be in the business of business, that the government should be in the business of development. But all things considered, what's the right way to incentivize it?
No, I do agree with you that there's obviously going to be bad players. It's not like they're angels. They're just coming to help everybody. There's bad players, in the government aspect, and there's bad players in the development aspect, of course. I think that what I wanted to really emphasize was that the federal government keeps trying to hold consultations instead of actually doing something useful. They want to, instead of incentivizing more building, they're holding consultations. They're inventing new government bureaucracies. They're slowing down immigration. It's very difficult for me to be like, okay, maybe they know what they're doing, because obviously they don't. It's not working, and they keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's not working every single time. In the context of what can be done to incentivize, I really just want federally, I'd really like them to just stop with the new bureaucracies, stop with all of this nonsense, with holding all these consultations and all of this, and actually incentivize perhaps provinces to incentivize municipalities to lower the burden of zoning and other regulations that are just unnecessary red tape when we're in a crisis. If it's a regular housing environment, then municipalities can do what they think is right. They think that everything is great. They can make these rules and regulations the way that they want to make everybody happy. When we're in a crisis, we have to incentivize municipalities to push harder in changing the rules. And that's just the way it has to be if we actually want to have some housing being built.
Sabine Benoit, our guest. Let's pop back into our live chat powered by Park Power. I'm going to throw a bunch at you. You tell me what jumps out at you. Jamie, watching us on YouTube, says Stephen Harper scrapping Paul Martin's plans to expand Quebec's daycare program across Canada has made the Canadian economy very dependent on immigration, as birth rates have been falling flat for decades. Super Chat Ken says the Liberals did make a mess of this. Says it seems to be adjusting, though. Says as for Alberta's own Premier, Danielle Smith, asking for 20,000 low-income stream temporary foreign workers for 2 years back in 2024. We need measured immigration of all kinds. Justin says infill's playing an outsized role. Says it affects a minority of the population in the city, but we're hearing about it so much. He says nobody wants to address the very real issues in my neighborhood. Alberta Girl wonders, has anybody else wondered why subdivision developers have to produce cookie cutter homes, but infill's being allowed to design whatever they want with very little regulation? Says it changes the community without any real discernible plan. White Dream says a first-time home buyer cannot compete against somebody who's buying their second or third home, where they're using the equity in those properties to purchase. Says purchases for investment or rental needs to be eliminated. I don't know about that. That's you're starting to mess with the economy, mess with people's investments, but I'll take the point. Tracy says, after 20 years in training and employment, I don't understand why we spend millions on training and employment programs instead of focusing more on the in-demand occupations. Interesting comment on immigration and industry. Matthew says, I'm starting a PhD this fall. Attaboy, Matthew, to look at housing density policies. And he says, and I would love to get in touch with Sabine to discuss that at some point. He says he's going to shoot you an email. Tracy says real estate's still one of the best investments. We have a wide range of tools, but very few municipalities are using all of them. Chelsea the Ginge says there's a lot of reasons some of these areas were zoned as commercial to start with. Community design does matter. You can't just plop a residential zone where commercial was intended. Cliff says the reason why developers want to build infill single family rather than rentals is that there's more money there, and they're oftentimes quicker to build. You can get a sense here, Sabine, of where people are coming at this from a million different angles. And I think that these, immigration and housing, but in particular housing, I think is, most people will form their strongest opinions based on their personal experiences or what they're seeing around them. Would you characterize this as an issue of equal importance across the country, equal relevance across the country? Not all provincial populations are growing like Alberta's is. I saw Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew just the other day celebrating that for the first year in a long time, Manitoba welcomed more people than it said goodbye to, which is obviously big in turning that trend around for Manitoba. But what about the rest of the country? Is this an issue truly coast to coast?
Oh yeah, like Canada is in a housing crisis. Ontario isn't, Alberta isn't, like Manitoba isn't. It's Canada. Every province is seeing this. We're having a really big problem with this, and that's why federally they're responding in the ways that they are, whether those ways are good or bad. They are responding to it because it is a countrywide problem. Something that people should know is that, single detached homes make up over half of the residential dwelling stock in Canada. That's in the OECD average is 40%, and that's against 33% for flats and apartments in Canada. That's a lot. So when we're talking about single detached homes, they're taking up so much space. And redeveloping something to make it to sort of build up. I call it building up, making sure that there's places for multiple units to be there, whether that be triplexes or apartment buildings. That's what we need across the country. It's like a very countrywide answer is just more stock, more places for people to live. And I really like the comments that you read out. I think they represent a very diverse set of ideas, but they all have the same sort of theme, that there is a huge problem, and this is something that a lot of Canadians are saying across the country. When we're talking about birth rates, one comment was talking about birth rates. Completely agree. That's really hard for us to if people want to have families, it's really hard for them to do that, as I said a few times before, when they don't have the housing to do that in. And in-demand occupations. One in-demand occupation is construction, so that we can actually build these buildings. So I take that point, and I think it's a great point. If we're built, I'd love to see more people that can work in construction in Canada, coming as immigrants and doing that work. Housing density. I understand that people have problems with that. Unfortunately, that's the way that we have to go. We have to have more dense housing if we're going to solve this crisis, because it is indeed a crisis.
Go. Sorry, I stepped on your toes again. Gosh, we're just.
I'm
just,
not at all.
Yeah.
I love talking about this.
Well, so do I. And you're just making good point. And I feel like I have yet to meet anyone serious that has disagreed with the fact that density is integral and obvious to solving this, maybe addressing this, let's say, not solving it. I don't know anyone serious that pushes back on that. The question is just, what does that density look like and where is it? And yes. I guess you're never going to find consensus. On one hand, we brought a fellow on here, Travis Watt, about a month ago, and he sort of poured out his heart and talked about his family's experience. And not everyone, but a lot of people in the chat are like, NIMBY, he's a NIMBY, you're a NIMBY. And he's going, I'm not. He goes, I support density. I want density in our neighborhood. I just don't want it like this. But it kind of turns into, in neighborhoods, doesn't it? Especially with like vibrant community leagues and well-used Facebook groups, and where people are really communicating and rallying and putting up their lawn signs and in some cases putting rather unwelcoming signs up on construction fences around new builds. This becomes kind of like a you're either with us or against us type scenario.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I'm a big advocate for community. I think communities should be the ones deciding or talking about these things. I don't think that a centralized source, i.e. like the federal government or somebody centralized, is going to be deciding what a neighborhood needs and what a neighborhood doesn't need. But we have to start thinking, is it important to keep a neighborhood's character, or is it important for people to have housing? I understand that neighborhood character is very important, that people want to keep that kind of lifestyle that they're used to, that they've been used to for decades. But we are in a crisis. We do need to build. And that those fears are often rooted in the unknown. And I think that If they take a look around at other places that have had that density, the community is just growing. It's a nice thing. You get more people, you get more diversity, you get more people to talk to become friends with. So it's okay. It will be okay, I think, at the end of the day, if we do increase that density responsibly. I don't want us to not have enough places to throw out our garbage. I don't want us to have zero trees. I don't want to completely eliminate the environment, but there is a third option, as I said in the beginning of our conversation, where we increase the density and we do it in a way that the community can get behind, I hope.
Sure, appreciate your perspective on this and your availability. I want to let people know if they want to check out more on what you and your team do. They can visit consumerchoicecenter.org. Valuable resources where you and your colleagues are advocating for Canadian consumers on issues just like housing, but not limited to. I see things like financial regulation, dietary guidelines, stablecoins, social media, drug price control. And this, an area of particular interest, we'll use this as a hook so people can check out the website, the world's most passenger-friendly airports for 2025. How's that for a resource at consumerchoicecenter.org? That's where Sabine Benoit is the Canadian Policy Associate. We sure appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You got it. On the live chat, the comments continue to come in. And, of course, we invite your feedback, as mentioned, YouTube comments. You can leave comments on Spotify. Johnny keeps an eye on those as well. And to our inbox, talk at ryanjespersen.com. Chelsea says the biggest issue with relaxing the zoning is that developers are not building affordable infill. Another important point, Chelsea.
That's a great point.
Yeah, she says like a $400,000 house. I always think anytime audience members of ours from Toronto and Vancouver listen, they're going to go $400,000 houses. Teardowns there are like $1 million. But she says a $400,000 house torn down for two $700,000 townhomes or skinny homes does absolutely nothing for affordability. Tara Lynn says homeownership and housing's always been an issue. She says tent city in Edmonton. Look at it right now. She says my grandparents' generation, they used to buy these tiny houses, living in the basement and renting out the top floor.
Yeah, but I mean, it's so funny that comment you made about that. All I want is my little patch of grass in my townhouse. It's so funny because, people were doing that back then, but also they had access, like boomers, and that's not a derogatory term. I'm just using.
Not at all.
That's the generation name.
Any term can be derogatory with
I know,
with
and
the
I'm
tone
not,
of voice, but you're not applying.
I'm not
the tone
saying
of
it.
voice.
I'm referring to that generation.
Yes.
If you were of age in 1980, you bought a house that was 3.5 times larger than that for like $70,000. Inflation or whatever, it probably equivalent to like $150,000 today.
Sure.
Which is crazy. That is insane. That is like, and so when she said that, I just laughed. But also, that infill comment is so bang on. Yeah, those infills are great.
Yeah.
If they costed $400,000, they don't. You go up and look at the price tag; they're $1.2 million.
Yeah, and not even just. And I know that she's referencing, Chelsea's referencing, either the skinny homes or maybe these duplexes. There's beautiful duplexes out there. But even the fourplexes, the sixplexes, the eightplexes. A lot of people, and this is audience feedback. This is what you're telling us. People are saying this is not affordable housing either. Some of these are renting out. Some of these units are renting out for like $2,000 plus a month. And when we're talking about affordable housing, that's probably not the entry point that we're looking at, right? For something to qualify as affordable housing.
Yeah.
Scarlett says the problem we keep hearing is make it easier, with zoning, et cetera. But when you do make it like literally the easiest in the country, she's talking about like Edmonton, look at the issues. So like what other incentives are there, which is a fair question. Whiterium follows up to an earlier comment, says, yes, the government, Ryan, should be in the development business, create crown corps, push shitty developers out, lower costs and prices, and stop developers from dictating builds. I'm open to the argument. I'm open to somebody changing my mind. I just typically, based on what I see, I don't love when government gets in the business of business, and I just don't know that it works out. Like maybe there are examples where it's been brilliant, but I can think of a lot of examples where it's been brutal. And but I'm always open to have my mind changed.
Yeah. But that was a great conversation. I can't wait to put
She's
up
so
a highlight of that. I can't wait. You may be surprised, but I am going to rewatch that segment because there was just so much great knowledge there. And this is, I mean, as I get older, I think this will be the defining thing about my generation, the generation after me, and the generation after that. Is we're all like, I'm of the mind, and my partner disagrees with me. I wouldn't mind renting until I leave this earth or go into an old age home. I wouldn't mind renting. The problem is that a lot of people say that and are of that opinion because the dream of owning a home is just so far gone for so many people nowadays. They don't even think about it. They just assume they're going to live in an apartment, a townhouse, or if they get to a home, they're probably going to rent that home or have someone live in the basement or live with family members because it's just so out of reach.
And you've got people that are trying to get to that magic 5% down payment, right?
Oh, isn't it 10? You can't really.
I mean, it depends on whether you want to pay the CMHC insurance,
you want an
this, that, and the other.
nice
But
home,
you can usually get into a mortgage if you have 5% down. But if you're seeing house prices rise by 5 or 10% annually, how are you ever going to get there with your down payment? I understand that. I want to stay on these comments just because there's a ton coming in. Obviously, Real Talkers are all fired up on this. Boom Shanker X makes another very good point. I'm never surprised, by the way, when Real Talkers make good points. Obviously, we found each other for a reason. Boom Shanker X says affordability is not going to happen for quite some time until they can really hammer down and build for several years. Adam C. Says Henry Ford wasn't told to make cars affordable for the masses. He saw that was where the opportunity was. In other words, it was not imposed affordability. He says Adam says home builders are responding to market incentives, including all the regulations. Tommy Temper, what's up, Tommy? Says, my dad said when I was young, he said, get into real estate because they're not making any more land. And I've heard that so many times, not necessarily wrong. It goes to show where a lot of people have where their nest egg is, where a lot of people have really invested and strategized, in the context of their retirement security. Ms. KD also makes a very good point too, and this is true. This blows my mind when you think back to it. When I was just a wee lad, John, when I was but 3 or 4 years old,
it was
in
about
1980,
scoring.
But Ms. KD is right in saying, you guys, in 1980, interest rates were 18% or more. Inflation was high, unemployment was high, and that's also true.
But people could still buy a home.
Well,
so
sure they
just...
could, but there were a lot of people you could get into a house, but it was like buying a house. The interest rates, it was like buying a house on a credit card. It was like they're looking at 20% interest. I can't even wrap my mind around that right now. And you look at where housing prices are now. It's all relative. I'm not an economist. Don't ever take my my prognostications that seriously on finances. Yeah. But I do know that if you were to be looking at interest rates from the early 1980s and apply them to housing prices now, some people wouldn't even dream of it.
That's fine, but you're not. Boomer's not going to get sympathy from me. Again, not derogatory, just referring to the generation. Because for me, the 1980s and 90s, I would love to go back in a time machine and I feel that 20-year span from 1980 to 2000 was almost perfect before the internet boom, before everyone had a cell phone, before everything went out of control. But we still had a lot of technological advances that made us comfortable. I love Emma Aikens. I agree with, I know she said too, my home is my retirement. But like you just said, if you save money instead of paying a mortgage and just pay rent, because let's say you buy a home and then 40 years later, is it even worth, is it worth to sell for retirement? Versus if you just save your money and then use that money as your retirement?
We have an interesting comment here from Darren who says, financially speaking, by the way, on this show, don't take financial, no offense, Darren, it's not a shot at you at all. Don't take financial advice from anybody except North Road Investment Council at northroadic.com. Definitely do not take your financial advice from me. Darren says, financially speaking, a lot of people would be further ahead to rent and invest in index funds. Says mortgage isn't the only cost of owning. It adds up. He says, but there is definitely something really freeing about owning and being able to do whatever you want with the place.
Sure. Also handcuffed, though. You own... not to go too off track, you own an older home. Yeah. And how many times have you had to deal with the things that come along with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't even get me started.
We can make a list.
We signed up for it, though. Matthew says had an elderly neighbor who told him about buying their first home. Her husband bought a car, but soon after that got a job that had a work car. So they sold their car and used the proceeds for a down payment. Everybody finds a way to make it work, right? Ms. Katie pointing out that back in the day, in the early 80s, and I've heard this story multiple times, people were just walking away from their houses. Like, people were literally putting the keys in the mailboxes and walking away. Tracy D says, how fast can you save, right? Like, she says, my current house is worth 6 times what my first house cost me over 25 years. So, I mean, obviously that's big. Different Tracy. Tracy C says, Johnny, what you're saying is so very true, but, it is about what you value, like you just said. She says some of us valued owning a home. Others value things like travel and experience, for sure. I can even think like in the industry where you and I came up, you think of, even, and there's many industries like this. I can think like RCMP would be very similar to media or anything else where, pipelining might also be another example where at any moment, given a new opportunity to advance your career or to maybe have income security for a year or two, you got to be willing to move at the drop of a hat. Mm-hmm. You're moving from in media, it's like I'm moving from Fox Creek to Grand Prairie. I'm moving from Grand Prairie to Comox. I'm moving from Comox to Halifax. Mm-hmm. And people need to do that. That's in a circumstance like that, maybe renting makes more sense. I remember when my career first began, leaving the Calgary Herald, I get my first radio job in Red Deer, and I had watched all of my friends, at least that's the way it felt at the time. At that time, we're like, in our early 20s, nobody's making a ton of dough, but some were able to scrounge up. I'm talking like early 2000s, like 2002, 2003. People were able to get into condos, and then as you know, when that boom started happening, 05, 06, 07, all of a sudden these condos are worth like double. Mm-hmm. I remember one of my friends bought a condo for like $79,000, sold it for like $260,000 2 years later, and has $200,000 in equity to now put down on a house. You're going, what? So then I moved to Red Deer, and I'm going, well, I got to rent because I got to be willing to, if I get a job, if I get an offer somewhere else in the country, I got to be able to move right away. So I rent. The same thing happens in Red Deer. Boom, 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 boom. Mm-hmm. So I moved to Edmonton. I go, I'm not going to let the same thing happen to me 3 times. I'm absolutely 100% buying a condo.
Sure.
And what happens? I buy this condo at probably the highest value it ever saw, at least on assessed value. And it's been a nightmare ever since. We just sold it a month ago. So, in that case, renting would have made more sense.
Sure.
So, it always feels like in anything else, especially in finances, sports wagering included, if you're ever trying to catch up all the time, Bitcoin, crypto is another good example. If you're always trying to catch up, you really risk getting burned.
Yeah. And I get it. People do value owning a home. I think that's what I'm saying. If you have the money, I think everyone values owning a home, not just for the monetary value, but just to have a place to call your own with a backyard and a 2-car garage and all the things that we all dream about when we're younger. And Tracy, that's great that your house is worth 6 times it was over 25 years. But I'm talking about today. I don't own a home today. I could probably buy one in the next, or get into a mortgage in the next year or so. Yeah. But would the value I'm going into today be worth it? Because in my mind, it's not when I was younger. It's not going to be the size of home I thought I could afford back then. And in another 2 to 5 years, it's going to be even smaller. And I don't even want to think about 10 or 20 years from now when we're all living in train carts.
Jeez. Yeah, super. But they'll be like,
and those will be 1.2 million and 3 stacks
the
high.
Shipping containers now, the sea cans, right?
About.
You could do like these
and
beautiful.
I'm not even knocking them because
they're awesome.
There's some in BC and Vancouver where I'm like, I could live in one of these and be comfortable.
Absolutely.
They're
amazing. Everyone's, such great comments in the chat. Thanks, everybody. Ken is quite right in saying, let's be clear about the facts. Income has not kept up with average housing costs. It is a clear divergence, and he's absolutely correct.
Let us
know what you think to talk at RyanJespersen.com. Before we get to positive reflections, I think I already know the answer because I know you were working your ass off all weekend. But there are 2 groups of people. There are 2 types of people.
You say that lightly because I'm a DJ. It's actually fun.
Well, yes, I know, but you didn't. But you were working day, you were working night, and
it's the lack of sleep.
There's 2 groups of people, and only 2 groups of people. We can all agree on this. Coming out of this weekend, regardless of where you live in the world, those that did watch Happy Gilmore 2.
Oh, I didn't.
And those that did not watch Happy Gilmore 2. I had to.
Okay,
I
so there we are. We're 2. We're the 2
so
people
here
in
we
the
are.
world.
All I have to say, and I'm not going to spoil anything because I didn't want anybody spoiling anything for me,
And well, what am I going to say? I'm going to say this. Here's what I'm going to say. Anytime that there's a sequel, and I'm not going to talk plot lines, I'm not going to talk cameos, I'm not going to wreck anything for anybody, so it's safe to listen to this, okay? Because I do think that so much of Happy Gilmore 2, which actually I really enjoyed, so much of it is based on the things that happen to make you laugh. You don't see them coming, so I'm not going to say anything. But I will say this: there's a lot of pressure. I think The Godfather is maybe one of the maybe The Empire Strikes Back, but there's not a ton of like sequels that are better than the originals. I did not at any point hope or dream that Happy Gilmore 2 would be better than the original, which is one of the greatest comedies of all time. But I will say that evolved and adapted for time, for current golf storylines, and for, sort of how films are being made and stories are being told these days. I thought it was super entertaining. I thought that Adam Sandler was like decent, but I thought that I really like Adam Sandler, but there was like just great performances across the board for what it is, right? This isn't like Citizen Kane. This isn't Schindler's List. This isn't going to win 15 Academy Awards like Titanic or anything else. But I would say that it was like a super fun watch, and if you like golf even a little bit, I think you're going to love it.
Yeah, it's very hard. I saw the same sentiment online. How hard is it to make a sequel better than the first? You're never going to do it, especially when it's 10, 20, 30 years later, right? But I saw the same thing online. People were saying, and again, I won't give away the plot either, but that at a certain part in the movie, things kind of get a little derailed, or there's a part where like people are like, I won't say exactly because it's a tournament name, the maxi part of the where they're like, I didn't really. But overall, people were like overjoyed that this was made because it was like years in the making. Was it going to happen? Was it not? But yeah, sequels rarely trump the first, unless you're talking about Return of the Jedi.
Well, I've got and I knew I was going to raise the ire when I said that. As soon as it came out of my mouth, I was like, because Cactus Sheriff says, how dare you compare Happy Gilmore 2 to The Empire Strikes Back. I didn't compare them. I'm just saying it's very difficult for a sequel to be better than the original. Yeah. But in this one, and I'm not saying it is, but I'm just saying I thought it was really good. Alberta Girl says they watched it as a family movie night, which is awesome. Tracy says she's heard nothing but good reviews about Happy Gilmore 2.
I will say, out of the Home Alone series, Home Alone 2 is my favorite. Home Alone Lost in New York. I just love. I have this infatuation. I'm just enamored by like Christmas in New York. So at Christmas, I always opt to watch number 2. Now, does that mean it's better than Home Alone 1? Does that mean I would have even watched 2 if I hadn't seen 1 and loved it so much? Probably not. But I do feel like sometimes they can knock it out of the park. But I think in general, and the fact that it's released on Netflix, Happy Gilmore 2, I think is just amazing.
Yeah, like not in theaters.
You didn't have to go to it's just access for everyone. Yeah. I love when that happens. I understand that it can't all the time. People have to make money. You have to, and I know there's money in streaming as well, tons. But, most people opt for something like this to also be in theaters and then released on Netflix or concurrently at the same time. I thought it was awesome that they just Netflix the day it comes out.
This is why Netflix, because even my wife Carrie, we're settling down, open a bottle of wine, we're just debriefing. We decide to watch a movie together. I make a pretty good popcorn. It's not just I put a lot of time
it for exactly the right amount.
No, it's like the real old school movie. You pour it in. It's like just like they have in the theaters, and it's like pouring out of the big silver thing, and it's got to be drizzled. You can't dump butter on it; it gets too soggy. It's got to be drizzled. I put a lot of love into it. I put a lot of care into it, and all of a sudden, I hear from the other room. She goes, Happy Gilmore 2 is on Netflix? I go, yeah, of course it is, right? Well, this is what Netflix gets. Adam Sandler signs a deal with Netflix initially in 2020 for 4 films, for $250 million, and then extends it another 4 films for $275 million. Yeah. So this is how Netflix gets to release this thing on their own platform. I'd love to see what streaming numbers look like.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that like, they're giving us free content, because I know they're making. Think about how much money Netflix is making if they're willing to give him $250 and then another over $500 million.
Yeah.
How much money is Netflix making from just Adam Sandler alone, and then all the others? I can only imagine. And every month they're like, we just want $2 more.
Yeah,
we just want 50
just 2 more. No, they
more.
don't even say. They just inform you. They just inform you. The cost is going up, and Probably nobody cancels. Erica says, I laughed out loud several times during Happy Gilmore 2. She says, it's really funny, dumb as hell, but that's exactly what I expected. I couldn't say it better myself. It was as dumb as I expected it to be, and I thought it was pretty good. Mariah, by the way, says she's with you. She says Home Alone 2 was better. She says it's a rare exception. Yeah. Marie says she'd rather watch South Park than Happy Gilmore. Okay, there you go. Tracy is demanding a full segment on that popcorn technique and the recipe. I think that that's actually that would be a great bit of content. You know what we'll do? Maybe we'll do a special video for our Real Talk patrons and our YouTube channel subscribers. Maybe we'll do a popcorn tutorial. That's actually a brilliant idea.
Ryan.
Hi, I'm Ryan.
Welcome to your perk for August 2005.
Are you concerned that microwave popcorn is giving you brain cancer?
Would you like
to wow your guests? Hey, while we're talking about golf, real quick, before we get to positive reflections, let me just remind you, if you're looking to get out on the course this week, if you're looking to put a tournament together either by the end of this summer, I mean, best of luck to you, or you want to lock in your date for 2026, may we, with great enthusiasm, recommend Alberta's top public golf course, and that is the Ranch Golf and Country Club, literally 18 minutes from downtown Edmonton. It's like the second turn. I mean, use Google Maps. Don't listen to me, but it's like the second turn as soon as you leave Edmonton city limits on the west side. I love this track. It actually was a ranch back in the day, the Red Wheel Ranch, and what they have done to transform it into the most stunning 18-hole public golf course that you're going to find in the Metro Edmonton region is remarkable. I absolutely love this place. That's why we throw the Real Talk Golf Classic there. Shout out to the recipients and the those applying, by the way, for the Real Talk Julie Rohr Scholarship. You got till August 1st to get your applications in. We wouldn't dream of taking our tournament anywhere else other than the ranch. We have a blast every time we're out there. Their hospitality team is second to none, and of course the course is always in tip-top condition. You can book your tee time today or inquire about a tournament by visiting their website. That's theranchgolf.com. Hey, out at the Real Talk Golf Classic, we were thrilled to have the team at UCAN Youth Services out there on one of the tee boxes, conducting a 50-50 and just telling everybody about what they do as this non-profitable charitable organization, a nonprofit dedicated to helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. I had lunch with Katie Krischke, the CEO, the executive director at UCAN, just the other day. You know what she told me? She told me that the 50-50 that they did on the tee box at the Real Talk Golf Classic, she said, aside from the Oilers, which I don't take offense to, she said, aside from the Oilers, it's the most successful 50-50 they've ever done.
Wow.
How about that? Shout out to Real Talkers that were golfing with us, and a shout out to UCAN Youth Services. You know, they've just got the keys to a new building. They're going to be doubling their service offerings. Twice as many young people are going to benefit from this expansion, but they can't do it without our help. We'll be telling you more about their capital campaign over the year to come, but you can check them out online right now. Learn more about them by visiting their website. That's ucan.ca.
So next time you go golfing, I've decided I'm going to come. I know I'm not an avid golfer. I'm going to get out there. Yeah, but I know how to hit, and I just my putting game is horrible. My long game is horrible. I can crank it though, but I've got a wicked swipe to the left,
like a slice.
Yeah, but I'll come out with you. But I've decided I'm gonna do my fit is going to be Happy Gilmore.
Oh, you're fit? Oh, like you're going to go Bruins or go Oilers?
No, I'll do another hated team. Probably do Leafs jersey, Puma sweatpants, vegan Timberlands, just so we look just like him, but Canadian version.
This is you would, John. You would. Accept an invitation to a golf course and show up in a Leafs jersey.
And I'll just crank them out by running straight up to them.
The Happy Gilmore. You know what? You can find it on my Instagram. Actually, if you go follow me at Ryan Jespersen, you'll have to scroll down a bit on my grid because it's on there. But Andrew Ferentz, former Stanley Cup champion, former captain of the Oilers. I was out with him at the JPL. I think it was 2, 3, 4 summers ago, hosting Tee Up for Tots, this big tournament for the Stollery. And he was out there, and someone jokes and is like, "Hey, Ferentz, do the Happy Gilmore," and the guy steps back and hits it and everyone's gonna think I'm exaggerating. I'm not exaggerating. He hit it like 275 down the pipe doing the Happy Gilmore.
I mean,
it was like one of the most wild things.
It's not a bad way to.
It's very difficult to do.
It's good form.
Yeah,
when you can get it.
Oh my gosh, I just it was one of the most impressive things I've ever seen.
Imphy Gilmore.
Yeah. But have you, like, people try to do it all the time and throw their backs out. Like, it's not easy, and you miss it. And you know, I mean, if you're trying to pull this thing off while other people are on the golf course, and that's a way to lose favor with your fellow golfers in a real hurry. You know, it's but when you can actually pull it off, it's truly remarkable. Can you tell right now I'm trying to kill time as I'm scrolling through my Instagram?
I could do more handles for me. It could be Happy Inf more. I could do. But it's just fun. What you're looking for right now is all I've seen all weekend on TikTok, on Instagram, is guys and gals going out to golf courses wearing Bruins jerseys and sweatpants and Timberlands and doing their run-up free-form golf.
All right, here it is.
Swings like this we're about to see from Ferentz.
So this is my Instagram post from August 29th, 2021. Here's Stanley Cup champion for the podcast. Listen, look at this. No, look at this. He's doing this on the fly, but he actually backs it up like a real athlete would. Like, he actually counts his steps. And then look at this. Just absolutely drops the
to
hammer.
The right, even.
Yeah, look at this. This is 18 at the JPL. Bam! It's just it over the bunkers. Just a beautiful shape, and lands it right in the middle of the fairway.
I know golf courses, especially the ranch. Shout out to our friends there. Don't want to hear this, but let's make this a thing.
Oh, geez.
Let's make it a thing.
Well, if they're not going to mind anywhere,
now I'm into golf.
They're not going to mind at the ranch.
Now we're having fun.
But this is like, okay, we're getting a little bit serious here. Well, I mean, what I'm talking about is the amount of time we're spending on this. But if you look at like. What Happy Gilmore does, and like, just I'm saying this like in a fun way,
brings joy.
But you know, there's people that believe that in golf you should grow the game, and there's people that believe you should shrink the game.
Sure.
And Happy Gilmore would serve to grow the game because it's going to remind people. John Daly was an example of someone that grew the game that way. Tiger Woods grew the game in much different ways and in many different ways. But I think like you make golf more accessible. Like you look at even some of the changes in course etiquette over the past while, and I know that our friends that
definitely evolved
at private courses, they're not going to love this stuff, or at some private courses anyway. But even speakers on carts, like speakers, people playing music while they golf. I feel like 10 years ago, maybe not 5.
You couldn't do that.
That was unheard of.
You used to go in the country club. There was jazz playing. Everyone was having mimosas.
Right? Yeah, hats off in the clubhouse. No phone use in the clubhouse. That sort of a thing.
Nowadays, there's a lot more noise on the course, and I just know that because I don't golf a lot. But just from our Real Talk Golf Classic, like think about 20 years ago, that would never happen on a golf course, right? But like, I get what you're saying. Like, it is a game of rules and etiquette, and there's a place for fun and stuff like that. But you don't want to absolutely blow the whole thing out. No. But at the same time, it's got to evolve. You've got to have fun, and you want kids to enjoy it and come up with it, right? So.
Without knowing it, John, you have basically offered informed commentary on the plot of Happy Gilmore too. So without even knowing
Can't wait to watch it tonight.
And you'll know what I'm talking about when you watch it. Real Talkers, let us know what you think on this as we wrap up our first episode of the week, courtesy of our friends at Solar by Kuby. You can get a free solar quote today at kuby.ca. We present something that, well, basically kind of eschews the negativity, right? That renews our faith in humanity, that maybe steps outside the news cycle and reminds us there is good all around us. It's Positive Reflections, proudly presented by Kuby Renewable Energy. And I love this one from Lenore, emailing into talk@ryanjespersen.com. She says, Jespo, just a quick note of appreciation. And she said, I thought it could be a good positive reflection. She says, my husband and I, as we were driving out to Jasper just this past weekend, I got this email this morning, by the way. She says, by total coincidence, I happen to be listening to your special episode marking the 1-year anniversary of the wildfire. That was your July 24th episode. Says, I was already feeling emotional before we even hit the park gates. Your interviews, your reflections, your clear love for Jasper really set the tone for what turned out to be a very meaningful visit. Lenore says, we hadn't been out there since the fire, so we weren't quite sure what to expect, but seeing those burn areas firsthand was jarring. It was sobering. But what stood out to us even more was the resilience from the friendly hotel staff to the chatty barista at our favorite coffee shop, to the young team running the canoe rentals at Pyramid Lake. Everybody that we met carried this quiet determination, like they'd been through something hard, but they refused to let it define them. She says, we had an absolutely wonderful weekend. We hiked, we ate well, we laughed a lot, and thanks to Real Talk, we felt more connected to the place and the people than we ever have before. Lenore says, thanks for telling stories that matter and for reminding us of the beauty both in nature and community. I love that from Lenore. thank you so much. I'm grateful you had a wonderful time. Encourage you to visit Jasper. Coming up this Wednesday, of course, My Jasper Memories, proudly presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. And you can always send us your positive reflections, like Lenore just did, to talk at ryanjespersen.com, or leave a comment on one of our YouTube episodes every week. First episode of the week, Positive Reflections, proudly presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. Tomorrow's show is going to be bonkers. I can't wait to get into it. I can't wait for you to participate in it. el-chidiac, remember her? A lawyer for the Freedom Convoy. She was on the show talking about that class action, suing the provincial and federal governments over vaccine injuries. Well, guess what? She has just been debanked. That's right. Her bank told her they don't want anything to do with her anymore. We're going to talk to her about it. And then we've got the past president of the Library Association of Alberta and the education minister together to talk about Alberta's new policy on school library books. You will not want to miss it. That's our July 29th episode. We'll talk to you then.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harmon Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.